Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the channel. So, in the words of Aubrey Drake Graham, back to back. The University of Georgia has just won consecutive national championships, led by walk-on phenomenon Stetson Bennett. So, as if you watched one of my previous video, I was going for TCU, right? I was going for TCU, but ultimately, in the back of my mind, I said the only thing that could potentially turn this game into what it ended up turning itself into was if TCU got there and they played scared or they didn't or they felt like the moment was too big for them. And that's essentially what Sonny Dykes said, going into halftime, that basically the guys like the moment was too big for them. But not taking anything away from the University of Georgia. They pretty much did whatever it is that they wanted to defensively and offensively. And I thought it was really interesting because during the game, obviously we're talking about the national championship game on, our forum and stuff like that. Pretty much everyone's football junkie. So we're watching the game. And someone said, well, Georgia's winning with the receiving core equivalent to what we have at Miami. And I was just like, wow, no, they're not. No, they're not. Um, watching again, like I said, one of the things that happens is that a lot of times we as fans, and I'll just use me for example. I've said this on a previous video. Saying is that I run a truck and stuff like that. On the weekends, especially during football season, a lot of times I'm either working on a truck or getting some things done, or just doing things around the house. And so I just make time, to watch Miami. And if I have a free weekend, then I'll select a couple of games to watch. And sometimes, obviously, of course, I watch a Georgia game. Just certain games. Just games that I feel like are intriguing. You know what I mean? But when necessarily you're not watching every single game because you're not a fan, you don't really know the inner workings and things that are going on. And the reason I say that is because in the Georgia versus Ohio State game, one of the things that was mentioned is that some of the guys, or I believe two of the receivers that Georgia, had to insert into the lineup were guys that hadn't played a heck of a lot. And then one of the particular guys, I think he caught a touchdown yesterday. They were saying that I think he hadn't had like a catch since the early part of the season, but he was dealing with an injury, right? So Georgia equivalent, so Georgia quite honestly was not full strength, and I think they were saying like Ladin McConkey, he was dealing with some injuries. They had to give him a shot or something. So he made some. Oh my goodness, man, he made some catches. Him and Brock Bowers. I mean, those receivers made some catches. And so it was like as soon as that post went up, it was like that's when it was almost like Monken could see, okay, let me show you. We have receivers, right? We just don't. Our offense is not just geared towards getting them the ball, on consecutive basis. But we have receivers, right? I mean, it's really not too much to take away from the game, other than Kirby Smart when they asked him pregame, basically what's the message? Hunt, hunt. They've hunt, and that's exactly what they did. I thought maybe TCU would have gave them a little bit more resistance, but I mean they didn't. I mean honestly they didn't. I thought they may have had an edge, in terms of, on the outside, at receiver and things like that. But that particular edge, it never, it never materialized. But kudos to the Georgia Bulldogs. You know what I mean? They're looking good. And I saw someone ask a question, and they were saying, does this win signify or say that Georgia is a dynasty? And I think it depends on how you define a dynasty, right? It depends on how you define a dynasty, because the rebuttal was, well, if you're saying that Georgia is a dynasty, then that means that you're saying there's an end to the Alabama dynasty. And so I guess when you put them into that particular term, then I guess you can't say Georgia is a dynasty because Alabama has not fallen off of the map. I don't think you can have two dynasties working at the same exact time, right? Unless, of course, it's a situation where those two teams are trading national championships back and forth, right? So, but we'll see. We'll see. What they're showing right now is that they're the most dominant team in college football, right? I mean, it's without question. Obviously, of course, you have obviously, Bama fans, looking at that game and saying, well, man, if we would have been there, we would have beat Georgia. And I mean, you never know, right? I think a lot of teams in the past, when there were only two teams available during the BCS era, could have said that obviously us and the Miami Hurricanes, said in 2000, we were probably one of the two best teams in all of college football. We should have played for a national championship in 2000. Obviously, I think what it was the 2000, was it 2004, 2003, whenever Auburn had that really, really good team, and they were not allowed to play for the national championship, that particular year. And I think they gave them like a share of it or something of that particular nature. But USC ended up, being the national champion. So you got a lot of, particular cases of that. So this is not something that's relatively new. And it just goes to show, even in a four-team scenario, you'll still have some teams that feel like, hey, we should have had that particular shot. We should have been in that particular game. Now, obviously, of course, we're going to 12 teams, and it wouldn't shock me, even in a 12-team scenario. It would not shock me if you have a team that's left out of the 12-team scenario that may feel like they have a shot. But I don't know how they're gonna, I don't know how they're gonna work that out. But in any regard, but anyway, kudos to the Georgia Bulldogs and kudos to the TCU Horned Frogs, a team that no one preseason expected them to be there because again they're coming off a 5-7 season. So I mean that was a massive, massive turnaround to even make it to that particular game. And maybe we could have said that they shot their best load against the University of Michigan, but I'm sure they can take something away. I know a lot of people are writing them off and saying that hey, they won't be back next year and stuff like that. But that's something that's going to bleed over into this next particular topic, right? So where is this narrative coming from about this transfer portal? Like where is this? I've seen a multitude of people say this game showed you why you can't load up in the transfer portal and expect to win a championship. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, wait a minute now. What does this have to do? What does this game have to do with the transfer portal? And again, I feel like it's my due diligence if I'm going to make content that I want to look this stuff up. So yes, TCU brought in 14 transfers. But the fine print said that only 3 or 4 of those guys actually were major contributors. So if you have a roster of 85 players and 14 come in, not via recruiting, but transfer portal, I mean you have 71 other players. So I'm trying to figure out, we're not even talking about half of a team. We're not even talking about half of a team. We're not even talking about, we're not even talking about a third. To be honest, we're not even talking about a third of the team. We're talking about like a fourth of the team came from the transfer portal. Less than a fourth, right? Because my math is, I'm looking at it from 20, 40, 60, 80, right? 14. That's not even a fourth of the team. So maybe it's a fifth. Maybe it's a fifth of the team came from the transfer portal. So, but obviously, of course, I understand the underlying thing from it because we as Miami Hurricane fans, we are jumping on Florida State because, hey, y'all can't recruit in high school. You're not gonna go. You're only gonna go so far with 20th ranked classes, and then hoping and praying that you get guys that hit in a particular portal and stuff like that. And again, my rebuttal is simply this: the portal in this particular iteration is it's not tested, right? It's not been long-term tested. You're talking about a 2-year experiment. We're looking at a situation with Michigan State where, again, like I said, Michigan State is one of those programs that I look at. And Michigan State didn't struggle because of portal guys, dominating the roster last year. They struggled because of injuries and guys who were supposed to be core pieces didn't perform. Similar to what we had this year. Core players that we had going into this year simply didn't perform. TVD didn't perform. Jalen Rooster Knight did not perform up to the level. Jalen Rivers, Ja'Kai Clark, obviously Zion didn't play. Will Mallory had a couple moments here and there. We had guys that were supposed to be core pieces. They just didn't perform. Now, obviously, of course, that particular dynamic is part coaching, part player, but that's that particular narrative. But the thing of it is like you pick and choose what you want to talk about because just as easily as we can talk about what transpired at Michigan State, then the same energy should be placed on Texas A&M. But people put a pause right there because they say, oh well, Jimbo's in his fifth year. What does it matter if he's in his fifth year? What does that matter? NIL came in. They signed the number one class, one of the greatest classes in college football history, and the majority of those guys have entered the portal and gone to other schools. Right? So again, personally, I try to be objective about things, right? I try to be objective because I tell people all the time, anybody asks me, I say I'm a fan of football first, and then I'm a fan of the Miami Hurricanes and Las Vegas Raiders. Because if I put me being a fan of the Hurricanes and the Raiders above being a football fan, then I make illogical statements. And again, I'm not above making illogical statements or statements that other people don't agree with, but I feel like I'm as about as objective as anybody can be in terms of covering or talking about college football. So again, if you want to say that in terms of the portal, then you should turn around equally and say, well, there's a high probability that if you sign a number one class and is driven by NIL involvement, then if the year does not go the way that it goes, then you can expect a mass exodus of those said players that you just signed. If that's the narrative, if that's the road that you want to go down. Now, somebody may say, well, these two instances are not the same. Well, the same. They are the same in essence that they are roughly 2 years old. The transfer portal in this incarnation is 2 years old. The NIL in this incarnation is 2 years old. So again, you really need at least 5 to 6 years to actually um to say, okay, we have enough information here to suggest that, okay, yes, this is the outcome that you're gonna get. But the TCU and Georgia game was simply a scenario where Georgia was just a better team, plain and simple. Georgia was the better team. Georgia was the more experienced team in this particular situation. I think that goes to show because a thing again, being objective, just being objective. We talk about a situation where coaches say, well, the team has to learn how to win. You know how teams that have postseason experience, you give them the edge over a team that just got there. You know, similar like you hear it in the NBA, you hear it in college football, you hear it in all major sports. Teams that have playoff experience versus the newcomers, the cards are heavily in the favor of the team with the experience. So if Sonny Dykes comes out and says at halftime, hey, it looks like our guys the eyes are too big, like they're not they don't understand the moment. And Kirby Smart guys are like, hey, this is another day at the office because this program has been in this situation 3 times already. They've been to the playoffs. They've played for 3 national championships. They've been here. The program. So they understand what it looks like. Kirby understands the type of preparation. Sonny Dykes is his first time here. But just to minimize this and try to turn this into, oh, well, they lost because they loaded up in the portal. Man, again, why? Like, how is this the narrative? Right? But anyway, man, y'all, again, like I said, man, I love when y'all comment, man. Let me know what y'all think about this in the comments. And lastly, what type of season would we rather have? Would we rather have the TCU season or would we rather have the Alabama season, right? And that was a poll I saw someone, start. And I said I want to have the TCU season because what's ended up happening is you're putting additional sauce on it. Because what we see last is what kind of permeates in our memory the most. So what did we see last? We saw Alabama destroy Kansas State. We saw them destroy Kansas State. And we saw TCU get destroyed by the University of Georgia. That's what we saw at the end. But what did we see going into this? Because the season, obviously, the season is capped off by how you end. You know, people say it's not how you start, it's how you finish. So obviously, that adage holds true. But what did it look like getting up to this particular point? Alabama did not look dominant throughout this entire season. TCU did not look dominant throughout this entire season. Alabama lost to two of their biggest rivals this particular year. They lost to Tennessee and they lost to LSU. Now, people will say, oh, well, they lost by a couple of points. Well, we lost to Florida State in Brad's, was it in 2015? That was Florida State in 2015. Or was it 2016? It's one of those years when they blocked the field goal. And I don't think anyone said, oh, well, you know, people what's the first thing they say? Man, Brad couldn't beat Florida State. Brad couldn't beat Florida State. And we're a blocked field goal away from at least tying the game. And then last year, Tyler Van Dyke, well, not last year, 2021, we lose the game from a situation where the defense just doesn't hold on. Offense did everything they could. But again, no one is saying, oh, well, you know, no, they lost. So keep the same energy. It doesn't matter if they lost by a total of 4 points. They lost the game. So as a Miami Hurricane fan, how would that look if we went 11-2 and lost to Florida State in a combination of either Florida and Notre Dame? How would we take that? I don't think we'd take it too well. We wouldn't take that well at all. Because I've seen fans say, listen, I don't care if we only win 2 games. And obviously this is not a realistic thing. But them 2 wins better be if they on the schedule. One of the wins better be against Florida State. And if Florida or Notre Dame is on the schedule, that better be the other win. That better be the other win. Let's go back to 2017. 2017 was a great year. We didn't finish the strongest, but we beat 2 of our rivals. We beat Florida State. Last second touchdown. We destroyed Notre Dame at the crib. And people still remember that season. People still remember that game against Notre Dame. So imagine that game had went the other way. So imagine if we would have lost to Florida State as well as Notre Dame that particular year, but we beat Pitt and we beat Clemson, right? Let's just say we still would have made it to the ACC championship game. But those were our 2 losses. And let's say we didn't go to the national championship game and we went to go play in a bowl game, you know, and won the bowl game. Yeah, the season would be a success, but the first thing we'll say, man, if we would have lost to Florida State and Notre Dame. Man, if we wouldn't have lost to Florida State and Notre Dame. Right? So, again, TCU just lost by the largest margin in a national championship game. Okay, fine. They lost. But the point, let's think about this. We saw equally as talented teams at the University of Georgia and Alabama losing in playoff games. Ohio State put up a donut in a playoff game, and they got the same amount of talent. We've seen situations where Alabama smoked Notre Dame. But again, a blowout is a blowout. Obviously, it's going to be in the history books. I mean, no argument, no rebuttal from me in that particular aspect. But there have been blowouts in national championship games when we see situations where both teams are equally as talented. And it comes down to coaching. That's that 5 to 10% that I'm talking about when I say, you know, talent will win you 90 to 95% of the games. But that 5% of that 10% of the games, that's when the coaching got to step up. And we seen it. But again, the narrative, the overwhelming narrative has become they took too many players in the portal. Not even a fifth of the roster is from the portal. Not even a fifth. But too many portal guys. You can't build a program off of the portal without taking into consideration that with the portal now, what's going to end up happening is guys, teams, and coaches are going to identify, man, that 4-star ain't what we thought he was. That 5-star ain't what we thought he was. We need to go get a replacement for him. Now, I guess, of course, you patching holes. But if you bring in 14 guys, that's the equivalent of patching holes. I'm trying to figure out this adage where it's like these teams have 30 and 40 guys from the portal, um, you know, manning uh, key contributing, places on the roster. That's not what we're seeing. That's not the dynamic that's at play right now. You see what I'm saying? But man, as always, man, it's about the U, man. Shout out to University of Georgia, TCU, and again, and this is the situation, right? The narrative has changed because previous years it was like the semifinal games were bad and the national championship games were relatively good. But now it's like semifinal games looked a heck of a lot better than the national championship game did, right? So kudos to both teams, right? So with that being said, man, I'm out, man. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and again, man, it's all about the you.